Welcome to the Tilted Halo, the place for women of faith and leadership who know that we're not perfect, yet boldly lead anyway. Whether you serve in ministry, business, or life, this show is here to encourage you, remind you that you're not alone, and help you lead with confidence, gratitude, and God's grace. Now, let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Tilted Halo. And yes, I am Kathleen Panning, Pastor Kathleen, and I am honored today to have as my guest Hugh Ballou. He is a leadership strategist, author, transformational leadership expert with over 4 decades of experience in empowering leaders across diverse sectors. Drawing on his background as a musical conductor, Ballou teaches leaders how to align vision, build cohesive teams, and orchestrate change. He has authored multiple books on leadership and communication and is the founder of Synervision Leadership Foundation. Through keynotes, coaching, and online programs, Ballou helps entrepreneurs, executives, and changemakers unlock their influence, lead with purpose, and drive measurable impact. His practical strategies blend inspiration with proven systems to elevate leadership performance at every level. Hugh, welcome to the Tilted Halo.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's good to be with you today.
And just so everybody knows, you and I have worked together in the past, not in the last couple of years. So we have a little bit of experience in communicating together in some of this. But I want to start with thinking about, as we're doing this interview, a couple of days ago, there was another mass shooting, and this time it involved a church. Sadly, 2 children in this case lost their lives and 17 others were injured. And then the shooter took their own life at that point. At least that's the indication right now. And we don't know all of the reasons for this and things like that, but it brings to mind to me the question, we are living in such a time where being a leader is tough. It's never been really easy, but it seems to be having so many more issues that we have to deal with, and a lot of change, a lot of conflict, and a lot of stress. How can leaders, especially within people of faith in leadership, be more proactive, and look at some of these issues perhaps in a fresh way?
That's a really deep question. Just hit me hard with a big one right off. It's as leaders, and I work with leaders in multiple segments, multinational corporations, startup entrepreneurs, small, large churches, community organizations, chambers of commerce. It's the consistency is the culture is a reflection of the leader. And having studied the work of Murray Bowen and Bowen Family Systems, looking at systems, we're all in a system, a family system. A church is a family system. We show up like we showed up in our family of origin. And it's our job as leaders to remain calm. It's interesting. My wife and I work through the daily lectionary. I'm a recovering Scottish Presbyterian, so we read in the Presbyterian daily prayer. The Scots, we pray, forgive us our debts in the Lord's Prayer. But besides that, we're pretty good folks. But it's interesting that the stories there reflect, they're like current events. They're not only history, they're like current events. And to see how God used people, all kind of people. And there's some pretty bad people in the books in our canon that we read. And it's also looking at the newspapers from 100 years ago. It's the same news. So nothing's new under the sun if you go back to Ecclesiastes. And so as a leader, if we get anxious, everybody in the culture is going to be anxious. And you and I, before we went on, talked about the schisms in the different denominations where people get, and it's not new. Being a Presbyterian, there's lots of different schisms that have happened over the years.
Same with Lutherans.
Same with Methodists. Same with Episcopalians. Sometimes people charge off and they get mad, and then after a cooling off period, they go, "Wait a minute, that was wrong." And so some of those congregations left because the leader said, "Let's do it," and then they get out there and they wonder what happened. And so we can't control what happens. Ultimately, God's in charge. And ultimately, we are people of faith. And ultimately, we are leading the people forward. And what do we know in Scripture? And what do we know intuitively? It's God's Holy Spirit working in us and through us. And so we can do things differently in the church. And that church and many churches, I grew up in the South. There were people that burned black churches. This goes back. We look around the world, this persecution of Christians all around the world. And it's horrible. It's horrible. And we have strife. Our job is to see where God's Spirit is leading us. How do we stay calm? The other person that my wife and I read is the work of Richard Rohr, Franciscan, and he leads us to non-dual thinking. And we want to be dualistic. These are bad people. We're good people. These are bad people. These are good people. And I had the pleasure of being in the streets of Martin Luther King, and he addressed my student body at Georgia State College. And he said, you look back in the movies, and the white hat cowboy is the good guy, and the black hat cowboy is the bad guy. And so we wrote that right down the language, and this the subtleness of black or white, blackmail, blacklist. We have ways that we're prejudiced in our list. We have in our language, and we have ways that we communicate bias. And, if we say that, okay, we're all God's children, how can we form a new way of being inside this culture? We cannot control who comes. In rural Virginia, I drove by the local church, and there was a guard outside with a rifle. And I thought, my goodness. And that was 10 years ago.
Wow.
I live in Lynchburg. We don't have some of the complications as I'm sure underneath we do, but we don't have some of the turmoil that in some of the big cities. So we do have a challenge as leaders. And if we're a person of faith, we're always a person of faith. So I don't want to co-op or contribute to the conflict. And so my job is to stay calm and to help other people stay calm. And how do we walk through it? Well, there's no one right answer, I don't think, but that's my answer. Any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, a lot of it does. However, I see some of the leaders being also some of the reason for some of the schism and some of the language of judgment and us versus them types of things. And, if we call ourselves people of faith, and yet we all understand that faith a little bit differently and understand God differently. So how do we work together better within those differences?
Look for commonalities. I work with groups. I'm a music conductor for 40 years, as you said, but I've also overlapping that been working as an external resource for groups and for leaders. And in working with groups, building consensus, it's a topic people don't really understand, and leaders don't understand. We don't understand the difference between compromise, which is lose-lose, and consensus, which is win-win. So we think they're the same thing, but they're the opposite. And then when I work with groups, and I've come into groups that have been in turmoil and they're at each other, and I use a methodology where I use storyboards so people are looking at the words and they're not looking at each other, so we can attack the words on the same side. And there's a whole psychological piece, but it lets us look at things and have conversations about the issues and sort them out. But we always start with things that don't matter. Like, what do we have in common? Family, food, fun. What do we have in common? And we come to consensus, which is a really powerful tool. Now, Robert's Rules of Order is time honored. It's proven. It's really good. There's not a consensus tool in that. So you have a group, and it's an up or down vote. Somebody makes a motion. Somebody does a second. You talk about it. You came into the meeting divided. It passes 5-4. You leave divided. So we really haven't accomplished much, except we've continued the division. And so what's happened in our government has been decades and decades of compromise. So it's the lose-lose battle. And as organizations, leaders of organizations, it's our job to say, okay, there's a different way. I don't care what everybody else does. This is what we do here. And you know what, Kathleen, in my study of Bowen family systems, I realize, and I've always realized, but it's just very evident, I can't change what anybody else does. I can change.
Wish we could. Yeah, the only one we can change is ourselves.
And staying consistent, anchoring ourselves. What are the principles? Now, we tend to write core values: honesty, integrity, equity, all those things. But if we got 10 people, we'll have 11 interpretations of the single word. So if we write a guiding principle, how are we going to let that represent itself in our culture? And if we work it together and we have a covenant, and a covenant is very different than a contract. What's our covenant with one another? How do we proceed? And how do we build this container? And how do we show up as people of faith no matter the adversity?
And that's interesting because we live in a time, especially in this country, where the covenants that we thought we had of how to proceed with things are being, at the very least, questioned, and some people would say thrown out. So that, to me, means that as leaders, it becomes even more incumbent on us to establish those covenants within the groups that we are a part of.
And where's our basis? Where's our values? Where do we bring it from? There's a side that would say we had destroyed the covenants and we're bringing them back, because our guiding document in the church is the Bible, and our guiding document in the country is the Constitution. And, the 10 Commandments hang in our Capitol.
Yeah.
And there's a basis for, and down the road from me in Williamsburg, Virginia, there's these people that were a lot of Presbyterians, but they wrote some of these documents here.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't agree.
Yeah.
And they were in their 30s. I mean, some of those were, I was thinking they were just these old people in their 50s, 60s. No, they were younger people.
Yeah. And yeah, even as we get older, we don't always agree. So agreement is not age. There's no age where we can say that we all agree. I think that this time and day and age is, I mean, many people go back to the 60s or in the 70s as questioning all the values and everything of our world. But to me, this feels like questioning even some values and ideas that were held sacred even back then. And so we're looking at things like the Constitution. What does that mean? What is it about? And like the Bible, there are some very different understandings of Scripture. Whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, those three major faiths all have people who understand that faith very differently from some of the others. And we're much more aware of that and much more vocal about that in many cases, and can put those ideas out into the world much more, because they were perhaps more localized in the past before social media and everything that we have now. But those ideas can spread farther and wider. Martin Luther understood that with the Gutenberg press and got his ideas out. That was the social media of his day and helped fuel the Reformation. And now we have another social media kind of reformation going on with social media, and you put in AI and all of that along with it. And we're facing a kind of revolution of how we understand ourselves in the world. Does that make sense?
And, there's some things that are timeless.
Yeah.
When I taught middle school music, I had people go write something on their choice. And one of the students, a seventh grader, decided to write on Renaissance music. And he says there's only 10% that's extant, and the rest of it's timeless. And, there are things like Scripture's timeless. And, even the different translations of Scriptures, some of them came from different origins. Going back, the different translations lead you in different paths.
Yeah.
So what I like about, I would mention Richard Rohr, that's Rohr for people who don't know the name. He says this is what it says in the Hebrew. This is what it says in the Greek. What is the original language and the context of that?
Right.
So I'm going back to my original premise, Kathleen. What do we have in common? I was in the streets in the 60s, 62, 63, 64, with the people who couldn't get a Coca-Cola in Walgreens because of the color of their skin. They couldn't go to the hospital. They couldn't, had to ride in the back of the bus. And I'm thinking, why? So I'm just there trying to take it in, being calm and being present, staying calm, listening for understanding. We're all God's people. We're
Yeah.
all God's creation. And how do we, and there, that makes it really hard. Jesus gave us two commandments as Christians, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. And those are hard.
Yeah. And the second one, love your neighbor as yourself. There are a lot of people who have a hard time loving themselves.
That is true. And I think we're in a culture where we've got a lot of mental illness.
Yeah.
And we can blame, we want to be dualistic and blame others. And, people in our government are blaming others. And I would say, can you find anybody that's innocent? We have
Paul
broken.
says we have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So no.
And, a lot of this is a distraction. What is the calling of our community faith? 5 years ago, we're recording this toward the middle of 2025.
Yeah.
5 years ago, the Washington Post wrote an article that said that at the current trajectory, the mainline denominations have 23 Easters left. Well,
Wow.
in the 5 years, I've seen Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterians going down in numbers.
Yeah.
Now, I joined a different church, and they have 20 years, have founded 30 churches, and all of them are growing. So it's a very different paradigm, but we're not loyal to the Great Commandment. It's not the Great Suggestion. It's not your mission. It's the commandment. It is not a choice, making disciples, and we're not faithful to that as communities of faith. And we're getting distracted by the issues. Now, I remember Paul saying, powers and principalities.
Right.
And that's still very true. And we're distracted, and we're distracted by these things. And I'm sure God grieves that we are not living out our lives as people of faith. And you know what? There are negative things that happen every second somewhere in the world against a Christian.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It is atrocious. It is atrocious.
Against Christians and Jews, and some places it's against Muslims and Buddhists or whoever.
Well, yes, others, but I meant
Yeah.
the Christians because you started with the Catholic Church. So we are a persecuted people. I had the pleasure of going to my homeland in Scotland. I'm Hugh Ballou. And seeing when they were captive by the Vikings and the British, those were pretty horrible times. But, we were on Iona. That's where St. Columba brought Christianity to Scotland. And, faith lived through and people persevered, and we focused on what God has made us to be. So I think some of this, I understand we're all chewing on our nails and we're all anxious, which makes all of what I'm saying very hard to do. And, we're comfortable. We're in a comfortable house and we've got income, and a lot of people don't.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And that to me indicates that as people of faith and women of faith, as my basic community here, it is incumbent on us to listen, to hear the other stories that maybe make us uncomfortable and that we're uncomfortable with, and to talk with the people who are different from us, to hear how much we do have in common. Lo and behold, everybody wants food on the table. Everybody wants security for their children. Everybody wants a chance to live a decent life, whatever that means for them, and to to have a safe place to live. I don't know of anybody who doesn't want any of those things, and yet we get so distracted, like you said, by all of the rest of this and what Luther calls the adiaphora, the not necessary stuff. What's necessary is loving God and loving our neighbors as ourselves. That's what's necessary. And the more we forget that and get distracted on all of these other things, That's when we get into trouble. But the question still comes in, how do we love our neighbor? What does that mean? Jesus told a parable about that one too. So
Told a lot of parables, and he didn't
yeah,
explain them. We have to work it out
right,
with fear and trembling. So I think
right.
that's the profound question that leaders need to live with. What if you start with values and then you translate those into the guiding principles, which is an actionable step. Values are static, principles are actionable. And so and that's how we build a community together. And what do we do about things that we cannot control?
Yeah.
And there's plenty of them. And, we're talked about the schisms and the denominations. Listen to Bishop Willimon was talking through a new book, Changing My Mind, which was really good. What's happened in 50 years of ministry with him, and where did he have to make changes to adapt to where we are? But we're talking about the large number of the Methodist churches left to form that new denomination based on their differences of opinion. And people were saying, congregational members were saying, oh, now we can be somewhere that's peaceful and we all agree.
For 5 minutes, maybe.
If you look at some of the other denominations where they had, really brutal schism and paid a lot of high lawyer fees, some of those congregations are saying, wait a minute, we were too hasty. We want to go back.
Yeah.
Because there's a historic foundation with, Wesley and all the systems, and Calvin and Luther. They have some different nuances and how they saw the church. But, fundamentally, we read the Bible and we come together and pray and we try to do good things with each other.
Yeah, we do. We do. And go back to an experience I had while at seminary. I was given the opportunity to attend, I can't remember the exact name of it, but something with the World Future Society, futurists, and heard people like Douglas John Hall and some other not Toffler, perhaps, big names at the time in the 70s speak. And there was a time, this was basically all Lutherans, and there was a time when we gathered in a small group for prayer, small group little things for some discussion and things. And the group I was in, the leader was asking us to start with prayer. And there was a gentleman who was standing near the door, would not come and sit down. I thought, who is this person just standing there observing? Would not pray with us. And I eventually asked one of the other participants there, what was that about? Somebody who was part of a very conservative Lutheran group who basically would not pray with anybody who did not understand the Book of Concordance extremely literally and the Bible extremely literally, and felt would be, in a sense, contaminated. Well, that's the only thing I can think of, by praying with people who maybe understood this a little differently. And it broke my heart to think that there are people who cannot even bring themselves to sit together in prayer with someone who may not be in total agreement with them on some things, but cannot even join together in prayer to God and still call themselves Christian.
Well, that's more common than I wish it were.
Yeah.
And, we being very literal about this is what the word says, is to me is on the edge of idolatry. You're idolizing the words.
Yeah. And a particular translation of it, by the way. Yeah.
It's got to be King James, and you can't change
right.
it. It's the word. That's what it says. That's what you got to do. Wait a minute. What is it in Greek? What is it in Hebrew? What's the context?
Yeah.
And all those he's. Was it really? We don't have but masculine, feminine. We don't have neuter in our language. Was there another pronoun? And we get into the minutia here. And we still got those two commandments. And what you just demonstrated, we're violating one of those.
Yeah.
One of the key. And if we represent, and people of faith, people that leaders in faith, like pastors, clergy, rabbis, people look at it. And I was a pastoral church musician, not ordained, but people would see us as representing God. That's not what we aim to do, but we're carrying responsibility for the position.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, with a conductor, you've got this little white stick, and you got union players. You can't make them do anything. You can influence them because your character and your expertise, your passion, all of those things. So that's the model that I use with leaders. We want to be autocratic when that doesn't work in today's world. And so how do we help people come to decisions? I served a 12,000 member church in Atlanta, and we brought in new members between 1 and 100 every single Sunday.
Wow.
Baptized 4 or 5 children every single Sunday. It was a place of engagement. You want to join the church? Join the church. Now we'll teach you the doctrine. Then you become a part of a prayer group of 3 people and a small group. So in the big group, you got small groups. That was the brilliance of that. But he was the preacher that built that from 2000, did not take sides on issues. He said, I'm going to teach you the Bible. You work with God to work out your solution. And, if you take either side on any issue, you've divided the congregation. So some people feel a call to take sides and be militant. God takes care of a lot of stuff if we're just faithful.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet it's hard when, we talk about God as a God of love, and we see some people saying, yeah, God loves except these people. God loves me, but not those people because of how they live and what they do or how they look or how, what language they speak or whatever the situation may be. And yet at some point, I feel a call to say, hey, wait a minute, folks. If God doesn't love them, God can't love me. God can't love you. And again, to bring that commonality, but to remind people that if God's love has to be for everyone or it's not for me too.
Well, that's a very poignant point. And nowhere am I saying any of this is easy or it's a slam dunk.
No.
We don't have issues. Now, there's triangles in the blood systems, and A person comes to B person and talks about C person who is not there. And
Correct.
usually it's about these people are doing these things, which we have a lot of triangling. People talk about those others. And then somebody's really angry about the others and what they've done. And I calmly listen and always wait 3 seconds. And they wonder, what are you doing? I am validating that I have heard you. And then the most poignant question that I give them is, what was your role in creating this situation?
Ooh, I'm sure a lot of people don't like that question.
It goes silent.
Yes.
We all contribute. If there's conflict, we all contribute. And, we can say, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. We've all contributed somewhere. If we're anxious, it's going to be contagious. And I have been, we don't have to accept, like somebody tells you that. Paul said, speak the truth in love. Yes, that doesn't work for me. Here's how I use my language, is how I interpret that, and here's how I am going to proceed. And I am not going to let other people infect my emotions. And basically, I'm not going to get it on me. Now, do I always do that? Ooh. I teach this stuff.
You're not perfect.
I fall into traps. I've been an innovator since my early days in ministry in the 60s. Before we had even what we call now contemporary worship, which is a silly term because we're all living and it's just different style. And I did that kind of music. We've gotten around and did a Sunday night service. And recorded back then. The Protestant Radio and TV Center was in Atlanta. They did these little study tapes, spiritual tapes for sailors on ships. And we did some of the music.
Wow.
It was up-tempo stuff. So, I was one of the rebels. And in my Methodist church in Alabama, I was director of worship and fine arts. I had multiple responsibilities with 27 fine arts groups in this church. And I needed an associate. So I hired a black female. I didn't, in a white church. I didn't ask anybody. I just said I did it. And when I introduced her, I didn't pump her up, do all these things. I just said, here's Holly. And people could decide for themselves that she was a real person and a gifted person and a committed Christian. And so sometimes we set up issues ourselves trying to overcome resistance instead of just going forward with what's the truth and being very calm and direct about it.
Yeah. And, somebody I know talks about living our truth authentically, being authentic. And there is a place for that, being ourselves and, you know, allowing Holly to just be there and be her, and to not make being female and being a person of color the issue. But on the other hand, in that setting, that was an issue for some people, at least. And to allow them, at least, hopefully, the opportunity by not making that the focal point, but at least allow them the opportunity to see her as a human being first.
Yes, but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
And she was very talented. And so back in my early days, speaking of race, I was in Atlanta, and we were part of Atlanta that was DeKalb County, so the courthouse was in Decatur. And we go, and the water fountain says white only. And then there's a sign that says colored outside. And I went, Mom, are we colored? We're not white, we're pink. I don't see any difference in saying people of color or colored people.
Yeah.
We're still typing people, and we're all people of color. We're all humans. We're all God's creation. And I think we want to label people rather than we are one of a kind.
And yeah, as a female pastor, I experienced a lot of that every place I went, because I didn't fit the typical mold of being male. I didn't sound like most men sound, even though my voice is deeper than some women's voices. And, you know, my perspective is a little bit different in life. But by not making that the focal point when I went into any place, it became easier for people to at least have a chance to hear and see me.
Yes.
And I think that we make the mistake at times where we make differences the focal point. I like to celebrate differences, in many respects. I love the variety of God's creation, the variety of flowers and trees and everything like that, and see the beauty of all of that instead of, everything is homogeneous. I mean, I've got a garden outside that I could see out a window here where there's a huge mass of the same kind of yellow flowers all in bloom. It's beautiful. But, I also love where there's a diversity. Occasionally there's this little white flower that sticks up in the midst of that. Or there are other places in the garden where there's some other flower that's there. And I just totally enjoy seeing those surprises and celebrating those as well. And we forget that when we
do. We do.
and don't celebrate the joy of the uniqueness of each individual.
You know, I am a minority in my church, and there's 600 people there, 100 of whom are children on a Sunday, and
Wow.
1,000 people online. And this is one of 30 churches that came out of this mother church. But it's they don't talk about diversity. It just happens because we don't know, we're not inclusive. And
Yeah.
we I ask people, well, this church has exempted themselves from the ADA requirements. And I say, okay, there's a barrier here. And there's no, we're blocking for diversity. We're blocking 26% of our population
Wow.
who we call disabled. And we think we got a black person, we're diverse. One of my clients did these competitions of choirs, and there's 450 choirs.
Wow.
That's world cultures. It's not just
Yeah.
black and white. It's 100 different cultures
Wow.
coming together. And what happened in a competitive space is they're all cheering each other on, and world peace came because they're celebrating the joy of music. They took the focus off of the difference and focused on excellence in choral music. And that brought people together. And
Yeah.
the Americans were the most boring, of course, but But, I just was a lesson to me. We don't understand diversity. And part of being a conductor, I decided I would learn how to facilitate meetings and studied that craft about 30 years ago. And most people who think they can run meetings are blind to that. We all have blind spots. So that's one of my specialties. How do we inclusive? And we tend to want to pick people that we know are like us to be on our planning teams. And so from the very beginning that, you have out of 10 people, you don't want more than 5 that are experts in a topic. And you want to have some that are sort of knowledgeable, and you want to have some people that, if you're playing at a concert, you want somebody that's not a musician that's sitting in the pew or sitting in the audience. And we look at generational. I'm a boomer. Millennials and Zs are very different, but value the same. We approach it differently. So instead of saying, oh, they're different, they're millennials, instead of them saying, oh, they're boomers, we do have our idiosyncrasies, but we do have a lot of commonality. And what is our passion? And if we have a passion for what we're doing, I've seen teams with generations, with multiple races, with multiple ethnicities, come together and add a whole lot of value to stuff. When we don't talk about the differences, we talk about what is it we're doing. So it comes back to what we were started with. What are our common values? And then how do we talk about the principles? And then do we have a covenant on how we work together? Do we listen to each other? Do we wait before we respond? Do we listen with intent, or we listen to respond? I do think a lot of the heartburn that we experience as leaders is self-generated.
Yeah.
Not all of it, but we contribute.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. We do. So let's do something a little more practical. We've been talking in some bigger pictures here. If you were to give someone 3 concrete things to do to improve their leadership, especially for women of faith in any level and any kind of leadership situation, 3 actionable steps, what might they be?
Find out what people want. Find out what the sacred cows are, what the traditions are, what is the heartbeat of the congregation. And so going into a new congregation, it's always important to spend a year understanding them. We feel the need, oh, I got to prove myself, got to do something new. And, that was something that was important to somebody. So understanding people, and, you can try things for a season and, oh, that's really good. If it didn't work, it just disappears. Understanding who you're leading. Leadership is based on relationship. Murray Bowen's family systems is the opposite of Freud, where what do you feel about it? Let's dig into the issues. Let's talk about it. Bowen, no, you don't dig it up. You just spend time together. I, in 40 years, rarely had lunches alone. And I tried at least 2 or 3 times a week to write a note to somebody who had meant something to me. I had stationery. I sent it to them. So acknowledging people for who they are. And many times these are people I had conflict with. But when they had a complaint, I treated it, coming from a sales background, as a request for information. There's something missing that they don't understand, like the hymn choice. And that could be confrontational, which is not bad. You're with your front. I could be contrary to them. I could be mean about it and say, so what? Or I could say, I really understand that. And so understanding the people that you lead, number 1.
Okay.
Number 2, having a very clear goal in your mind. Where are we going together? And if you have a vision for the group, which is the leader's prerogative, to run the vision all the way down. Here's the vision, where we're going. And then at the end of this term of ministry, I would like to see us do this, because people want the leader to say, here's my vision.
Yeah.
God didn't give a vision to a committee. I don't see that. I don't see the history of that. So God gave the vision to the leader. You work it out. And so as it goes down and comes back up, the implementation belongs to the people. So we tend to say, here's where we're going, here's how we're going to get there. And you just cut everybody off, cut their legs off. So how are they going to go there if you just cut them off? Honoring where they are. I was doing a facilitation for a church in Ohio that was hiring 4 people. at the same time, putting them on the
Wow.
ground. So, I said, where are we going to go? Well, we don't have a written strategy. Well, let's stop. We're going to write the strategy. They ended up changing all of those position descriptions and changing it around. And then I said, let's work with all the committees. So 77 people got in a fellowship hall in a day. And we said, okay, here's how we build consensus. We take an idea and we run it down and come back up and say, okay, here's how we do it. Now, the leader maintains the veto power, but if you're really good at nurturing the process, a good leader rarely has to use it. But if you have to use it, you've got the relationship to say, that just isn't going to work for me. We don't have to bow in. We don't have to do things that we don't approve, but we're part of the process. Different from micromanaging is coaching, you know, helping people figure out the answer. So if you're really good on the vision, you're really good on saying, okay, here's the exact place we're going to be. How are we going to get there? And then you write it down. So those are the first two things. Spend time, be very clear on the vision. And then 3, people need a voice. We tend to over function as leaders out of our own sense of responsibility or insecurity. Well, it ain't going to be done right unless I do it. Well, if you have a specific goal and you help mentor the person, micromanages here, mentor here, opposite. If you're really clear on where you want to be and you mentor somebody and they don't know how to get there, so you're going to have conversations along the way. And it's not going to happen in a month. And so when I went to one church, the altar guild was, this is how we do things. I said, let's study worship. And then let's study what all these symbols in our sanctuary was rich with them. Let's study what they're about. And then let's look at the table and what it's about. And so I invited them to my house for high tea. They dressed up on a Saturday. We had tea and we talked about worship. They were my best friends. It was the War Department before. They were my best friends because I valued what they did and I stayed out of their way. We had touch points. Here's how it works. Here's the important days in the season. So it's all relationship. Communication is based on relationship. Leadership is based on relationship. And the financial future of your organization is based on relationship.
Yeah.
If people don't trust what you're doing, they're not going to support it in any way. So those are the 3 pillars. Are those practical enough for you?
They are really good, basic, and very important points. And I think if anybody follows those, their leadership abilities and what they can accomplish will be transformed. It will grow exponentially in that. And I can see that all of that working in a family, how you approach working as a family unit together, as well as in a large corporation or in a congregation. So, as a parent, you want to create a vision for your family. You need to listen. You need the communication. You need the involvement of everybody else in there as well, just as you do if you're CEO of a major corporation, or a congregation as a pastor, however small or large that may be.
Well, and I have a gift for your listeners. It's
Please.
like 5-minute increments, 31 days to becoming a better leader. And it's audio. It's betterleader.me. Betterleader.me. So if you go there, it takes you to the Center Vision site, and there's a whole channel there. And there's
we'll try to get that added to the video portion of this. So
it's a free podcast, but you can have it on. You can do it on your computer. You can get it on your phone, whatever phone you got. And there's an action guide that not only has the transcripts, but it's got the action guide. What do you do about it? 31 different things that you might have forgotten were part of leadership. So that's built on my 4 pillars. The foundation is where are you going? What's your vision? And do you have the skill? 2, it's relationships. You build relationships to do that. 3, systems. You got a good vision. You got good people. Well, don't kill it with bad systems. And then 4 is your balance. God gave us a Sabbath. Are we taking it for ourselves?
Yeah.
That's what makes all the others work. So that series is divided in those 4 sections.
Okay. That's fantastic. I thank you, Hugh. This has been a delightful conversation for me, and I hope for everybody who listens that you've gotten something really wonderful. Especially give us that link again for people, Better Vision.
It's Better Leader.
Betterleader.me.
It's about leadership. So it's Better Leader. And who is it about? Me. So Better Leader, and it's .me.
Betterleader.me. So, like I said, I'll try to get that in the notes or something like that to go out with this. So Thank you so much. It's been great to reconnect and to share this time together, and blessings to you as you continue in your work with Center Vision Leadership Foundation. And people can check that out as well and see where you folks are all going with all of that.
And yes, and just remind people, remain calm. And some of the most powerful pieces of music have this silence in them. And that's where God speaks to us through God's Spirit.
Right. Thank you so very, very much. So you've been listening to The Tilted Halo for women of faith who know we're not perfect, yet boldly lead anyway. If today's episode encouraged you, please like it, share it, and leave a comment. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss what's next. And for more tools, resources, and encouragement, visit me at KathleenAPanning.com. Until next time, keep leading boldly with faith, gratitude, and God's grace.